The conference room was freezing, the air conditioning cranked down so low it made your bones ache. Elias stood at the far end of the long table, slamming the final liquidation documents onto the sleek surface. Across from him, Victor sat with his legs crossed in the leather executive chair that once belonged to Elias's father, carelessly spinning a Montblanc pen between his fingers. The air was thick with Victor's suffocating alpha pheromones, the rich, fiercely aggressive bitterness of black coffee. It was just like the man himself, clinical, ruthless, and utterly unyielding. This was no romance. Victor had just systematically dismantled Elias's family empire through brutal corporate warfare, reducing Elias to nothing more than a debt-ridden prey. "Sign it, Elias." Victor's voice was a low purr, dripping with a victor's arrogance. "Sign, and your father stays a free man. Your new position? My personal financial assistant. On call 24/7. Elias pressed his lips together, the faint, metallic taste of iron cutting through his resolve. He did everything to suppress his own omega pheromones, a blend of sea salt and cold rain, refusing to let a single trace of fear leak out. He picked up the pen. The tip trembled against the paper as he signed away his freedom in this humiliating contract. What Victor didn't know was that beneath Elias's flat-tailored vest lay more than just schemes for revenge. There was also a 6-week-old embryo, sired by the inescapable magnetism of the predator sitting across from him. Elias was never the kind of Omega to trade his body for corporate gain, and Victor was certainly not an alpha swayed by mere beauty. Their physical entanglement was born from a high-pressure, zero-compromise, closed-door hostile takeover negotiation. Back then, the cracks in Elias's family empire were just beginning to show. Desperate to save it, Elias had gone alone to Victor's penthouse boardroom for a final showdown. For 8 grueling hours, they clashed in that sealed room, every nerve stretched to the breaking point. Under immense psychological strain and days of sleep deprivation, the Omega defenses Elias had locked down with suppressants began to fracture. Meanwhile, Victor, a prime apex predator, let his dominant, aggressive black coffee pheromones flood the room with every relentless demand. It wasn't a romantic encounter. It was a brutal clash of power. When Elias slammed a risk-sharing agreement against Victor's chest, threatening to burn everything down if Victor didn't back off, they crossed a dangerous line of proximity. The thick, hostile scents of sea salt and cold rain collided with black coffee, sparking a rare, violent pheromonal resonance. Neither side begged for mercy. Victor's primal alpha instincts flared with an intense desire for total domination. He wanted to mark this arrogant tycoon's bastard son and break his will entirely. Yet Elias, even on the verge of biological collapse, gritted his teeth. Throughout that fierce physical and physiological clash, he actually tried to overpower Victor. By dawn, the boardroom floor was a disaster of scattered financial statements and shattered glass. Before Victor could wake, Elias pulled his disheveled shirt back together, snatched a core memorandum from the table, and walked out into the cold morning, covered in his rival's inescapable alpha scent. They both dismissed it as an accident, a mutual adult transgression triggered by a pheromonal surge, a wild, dark footnote in a ruthless corporate war. Afterward, Victor even suspected Elias was trying to set a trap, which only fueled his determination to destroy Elias's family legacy. The signed agreement slid back across the long table, the blue-black ink bleeding faintly into the expensive paper. Victor pinched the edge of the document and looked up. His dark gray eyes swept over Elias's tense, trembling jawline. His oppressive black coffee pheromones intensified, dropping a heavy fraction of a degree. In the corner of the room, several investment bank directors instantly broke into a cold sweat. It was a calculated display of power for the new assistant, a clear message to ensure this unyielding Omega knew exactly who held total domination from day one. Elias straightened his spine as he caught the schedule. Victor tossed his way. His knuckles brushed the cold leather cover. Not a single emotion flickered across his face. Only the gland at the back of his neck tightened, suppressing his sea salt and cold rain pheromones until they vanished, leaving just a faint, lingering trace of bitterness, like a reef battered by the tide, submerged but unbroken. He gave a quiet, "Understood, Mr. Victor." As his suit jacket brushed the doorway on his way out, no one knew he was already mapping the first vulnerabilities in Victor's investment banking empire. The brilliant crimson sunset over Manhattan was quickly swallowed by a pitch-black night. Floor by floor, the lights of the Wall Street skyscraper went dark, leaving only two glowing beacons in the executive suite, Victor's office and Elias's open workspace right outside. The demand to reconcile 5 years of financial structures for every foreign subsidiary in just 3 days was a blatant setup designed to exhaust Elias and break his defiant spirit. As Elias typed the final line of code into the blinding screen, a sudden wave of nausea tore through his core, shattering his fragile composure. The low-dose anti-nausea injection he had secretly taken in the restroom that morning had completely worn off. His grip on the mouse tightened until his knuckles turned white. Unbidden, a trace of sweet scent leaked from the gland at the back of his neck, blending with the crisp, bitter notes of sea salt and cold rain. The aroma drifted through the half-open door of the CEO's office. Elias gripped the edge of the desk, trying to stand and get some ice water to settle his stomach, but his vision suddenly dissolved into darkness. His fingers dug into the matte black desk, his fingernails turning ghostly white from the pressure. Acid surged up his throat as his stomach violently churned, and the gland tightly sealed by suppressants began to burn. The entire penthouse floor was dead silent, except for the light in the executive suite. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was a sea of glittering lights. Elias's sweet scent drifted out like a warm current cracking through ice, instantly striking the alpha's hyper-acute senses. The sound of leather soles on the thick cashmere carpet was almost imperceptible. Elias swayed, his balance giving out. Just as he was about to collapse forward, a strong, defined hand caught his upper arm with perfect precision. Searing, dominant black coffee pheromones enveloped him completely. This time, it wasn't a heavy wave meant to crush his spirit, but a protective wrap that Victor himself barely realized he was offering. Victor draped his custom cashmere suit jacket over Elias's shoulders. The fabric, saturated with the rich, pure aroma of an elite alpha's black coffee, thoroughly masked every trace of the sweet omega scent leaking into the air. Low blood sugar? Victor's voice was low, carrying its usual inescapable magnetism. His thumb brushed against the burning gland at the back of his neck. Elias stiffened instantly, choking back a soft moan. When he looked up, his face was a mask of cold, pale composure, though his lips were drained of color. "I'm fine, sir. I just haven't had time to eat while working overtime." He deliberately shifted his weight to one side, hiding his trembling fingers pressed against his lower abdomen. The 7-week-old embryo rested quietly inside him, but right now, it felt like a knife held straight to his throat. Victor stared at the reddened corners of Elias's eyes for 3 long seconds. He didn't expose the paper-thin lie. Instead, he dropped a single cold command: finalize the Q3 offshore financial reports. Bring them to my desk in 10 minutes. He turned on his heel, striding back into his glass-partitioned office. Yet, his knuckles tightened imperceptibly, betrayed by that unfamiliar, delicate sweetness lingering in the air. He had been so certain that Elias had orchestrated a trap to climb the ranks. But this trace of sweetness was entirely out of place. He had never caught a scent like it on any Omega. Elias leaned heavily against the cool tiles of the break room, taking 5 slow minutes to steady himself. He downed half a glass of ice water, forcing the surging acidity back down his throat. Clutching the organized financial folders tightly against his chest, he stepped up to the executive office. Just as he raised his hand to knock, a crisp ding echoed from the private executive elevator. The click of a VIP keycard sliding through the penthouse scanner followed. Then came the sharp, rhythmic click of stilettos biting into the carpet, advancing toward him in a suffocating cloud of heavy gardenia perfume. Elias turned sideways, his fingertips digging fiercely into the edges of the thick folders. The arrival was Isabella, Victor's fiancée. Draped in an ivory haute couture silk gown, the diamond studs at her ears caught the glare of the hallway's crystal chandeliers. Her gaze was like a poisoned needle. It swept mockingly from Elias's ink-stained cuffs to the custom jacket draped over his shoulders, Victor's jacket. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Just what I'd expect from a pathetic, bankrupt bastard. Scheming your way into the penthouse, using the master's coat to mask your cheap pheromones? Do you honestly believe Victor will ever give you a real title? The faint tremor at the back of Elias's neck was safely hidden beneath his collar. His voice was utterly flat, betraying no emotion whatsoever. Ms. Isabella, I am Victor's personal assistant. I am not here to fight for a title, but I will remind you of one thing. The €3 million final payment for your private yacht, which you funneled through the firm's public relations budget last month? I've already flagged it as a non-compliant expenditure. It's right here on the first page of this report, waiting for Victor's signature of rejection. Right on cue. The office door was pulled open from the inside. Victor leaned against the doorframe, the hand holding his fountain pen resting casually against the wood. He watched the farce unfold with icy detachment, not uttering a single word. Isabella's face flushed red with rage. She aggressively unleashed her alpha pheromones, sending a suffocating wave of cloying gardenia rolling down the hallway, pressing hard against the physically drained Elias. The gland at the back of his neck burned as if it were going to shatter. The hidden toll of his pregnancy made his shoulders sway with sudden weakness. The folders in his arms slipped a fraction of an inch, and a fragile thread of sea salt and cold rain, laced with that faint sweetness, leaked into the air. In the very next second, pure, aggressive black coffee pheromones surged violently into the corridor. Carrying the crushing, total domination of an apex alpha, the scent utterly pulverized the sickeningly sweet gardenia, slamming the impact right back into Isabella. All color drained from her face instantly. Her stilettos faltered, and she staggered backward into the wall, barely managing to stay upright as she clutched her waist. She stared at Victor in absolute disbelief. "Get off the penthouse floor." Victor's voice was as cold as shattered ice. He didn't spare her a single glance. His inescapable gaze was pinned entirely on Elias's pale, bloodless lips. Elias stepped into the office and set the financial reports neatly on the desk. He then took the travel itinerary Victor held out to him. Next week, Victor would fly to Zurich for a week-long board of directors meeting. He wouldn't be at headquarters at all. As Elias's fingertips brushed against the hard-printed flight dates, the knuckles hidden deep within his tailored sleeves tightened imperceptibly. A corporate espionage plan, planting a Trojan horse into the system, crystallized perfectly in his mind for the very first time. With a full week of uninterrupted access, he had successfully secured entry to the outer financial pool's server room under the guise of compiling the Q3 reports. The roadmap to dismantle Victor's corporate empire had finally laid its first solid brick. Deep into the third night of Victor's trip to Zurich, the entire Wall Street headquarters was dark, save for the cold blue glow of the penthouse exit signs. Elias swiped his keycard and pushed through the heavy fire door of the server room. The chill of the central air conditioning swept across the back of his neck, where his gland still throbbed with a dull ache from Isabella's pheromonal clash. The profound weakness of a 7-week pregnancy had long since seeped into his bones. As he slipped the Trojan USB drive, hidden within his custom laptop, into the server port, his fingers flew across the keyboard. His highly strung nerves finally eased a fraction, causing a trace of sweet sea salt and cold rain to slip out uncontrollably, a scent drawn out by sheer biological instinct. He ground his back teeth to suppress it. Draped over his arm was Victor's haute couture jacket, its collar still carrying the lingering, unmistakable aroma of pure black coffee. Just as the progress bar hit 100%, a sudden, tearing ache dragged down his lower abdomen. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his tailored shirt. Elias gripped the edge of the server rack, his knuckles turning white. He swiftly wiped his digital footprints, yanked out the USB drive, and dragged himself along the wall, inch by agonizing inch, toward the executive washroom. By the time he bolted the door, he had already slid down against the freezing tiles. From his inner pocket, he pulled out a concealed, high-dose stabilizing injection. His trembling fingers failed to align the needle with the vein in his elbow for what felt like an eternity. The bitter, damp scent of sea salt and cold rain could no longer be contained. It spilled wildly out from under the bathroom door, carrying the tremors of his distress and filling the desolate corridor. The very second he pushed the plunger to the end, a crisp chime echoed from the penthouse elevator. The heavy, measured tread of leather shoes against the carpet drew closer, and that intensely dominant, pure bitterness of black coffee pheromones began curling under the doorframe. Cold sweat clung to Elias's perfectly pressed shirt. The dull ache in his neck gland snapped into a rigid burn. His sweet, pregnancy-laced sea salt and cold rain pheromones, already spiraling out of control from the agonizing cramps, collided with that overwhelming bitterness and flared wildly through the cracks in the tiles. Clutching a cotton towel, Elias frantically wiped the smeared medicine from the back of his hand. His fingers shook so violently, he could barely hold the empty syringe. Curving inward to protect his aching abdomen, he shoved the needle and the medication box into the deepest corner of the bottom cabinet. He braced his hands against the freezing ceramic to stand, but his legs gave out, sending him sliding right back to the floor. The doorknob was already turning with a rhythmic, inescapable magnetism. The solid wood door couldn't withstand the alpha's sheer physical presence and burst open inward. A towering shadow instantly engulfed the cramped washroom. The air turned scalding with the bitterness of black coffee, so thick it made Elias's breath hitch. Victor stood there in a dark gray suit wrinkled only slightly by a long-haul flight, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. His jawline was set in a razor-sharp edge, and his deep brown eyes swirled with a fierce, unprecedented intensity. He had flown back 12 hours early after sealing a Middle East partnership, only to step into the penthouse corridor and catch this agonizing wave of sea salt and cold rain. That faint sweetness, hidden beneath the coldness, had instantly ignited a primal instinct for total domination that he had suppressed for half a month. Elias curled his hands into fists against the wall, forcing himself to look up and meet that inescapable gaze. His fingertips pressed desperately into his lower abdomen to quell another wave of agonizing cramps. His voice was hoarse, yet it still carried that unbending, defiant edge, returning early without any notice. "Tell me, Victor, is this standard protocol for a top-tier CEO?" Victor didn't say a word. He closed the distance in a single stride. His black coffee pheromones enveloped the trembling yet unyielding sea salt and cold rain, utterly shattering every ounce of vulnerability Elias's scent betrayed. Bending down, his strong, defined hands gripped Elias's chilling waist, effortlessly lifting him into his arms, completely ignoring his stiff resistance. Elias's head fell against Victor's shoulder. The nausea of his pregnancy surged up alongside the dull, pulling pain. He bit his lip, refusing to show weakness, though the desperate force of his fingers digging into Victor's suit fabric gave away his immense tension. The beta employees in the hallway instantly bowed their heads, not even daring to breathe too loudly. The private elevator took them straight to the underground garage, and a bulletproof car drove smoothly to a private, mid-mountain penthouse. Kicking open the master bedroom door, Victor laid Elias gently onto the silk sheets. He pulled a cashmere blanket over Elias's cold ankles, his eyes dropping to the Omega's involuntarily tense lower abdomen. A persistent mountain fog shrouded the floor-to-ceiling windows. The scorching, dominant black coffee pheromones saturated the velvet carpets of the entire penthouse. Even the glass of cool water on the nightstand carried a lingering trace of that bitterness. Elias leaned against the terrace railing, his oversized hoodie perfectly concealing his still, flat stomach. His fingertips mindlessly traced the edge of his custom notebook, the Trojan USB drive wedged in its hidden compartment pressing against his skin like a red-hot piece of coal. Grounded in this penthouse for a full week of mandatory rest under Victor's watch, the dull ache in his neck gland had long been smoothed over by the constant hum of black coffee pheromones. Even the ominous, pulling cramps in his lower abdomen had largely faded, finally allowing him to rein in his erratic sea salt and cold rain scent. Yet his nerves remained wired tight. As his fingertips traced over the Q3 offshore financial reports for the third time, the blade of his revenge was honed sharper than ever. The Trojan had been lying dormant in the outer servers of Victor's investment bank for an entire week. It was merely one supreme clearance command away from detonating the entire financial empire. The electronic lock clicked softly. Victor pushed the door open, his tailored shoulders carrying the stark chill of the outdoors. His jawline was drawn into a razor-sharp edge. The blinding glare of his tablet illuminated his face, the screen entirely flooded with plummeting stock indices that looked like searing red blades. He didn't walk over to grip the back of Elias's neck to draw out a quiet yield, as was his usual custom. Instead, the heavy scent of corporate warfare mingled with his pheromones, pressing down so hard it made the air in the apartment tremble. Merrill Lynch just teamed up with 3 hedge funds to crash the market overnight. The offshore core capital pool has been intercepted, and our liquidity won't survive another 72 hours. His voice was a low rasp, rough from relentless, sleepless battles. His gaze swept over the heavy-duty server rack sitting idle in the spacious living room before dropping back to Elias's knuckles, tight around the laptop. His dark eyes narrowed. Elias's fingertips dug fiercely into the edge of the notebook, his heart skipping a vital beat. If he used this chaos to quietly transmit that final command, everything would be over. The scent of sea salt and cold rain involuntarily surged up, colliding sharply with the bitter notes of black coffee. He lifted his gaze, crashing straight into Victor's dark, inescapable stare. That deep-seated defiant pride, the absolute certainty that you will only fall by my hands, crawled through his veins, forcibly suppressing the immediate urge to pull the trigger. Victor took a heavy step toward the server rack, his strong, defined hand already lifting. Elias's knuckles bled bone white. His grip dug deep grooves into the edge of the custom notebook, concealing the Trojan drive. His pheromones flared uncontrollably. That delicate pregnancy-laced sweetness barely drifted half an inch into the air before it was instantly smothered by the overbearing bitterness of black coffee. When he spoke, his voice carried an imperceptibly tight rasp. "Stop." Victor froze. He turned his head slowly, his dark gray eyes swirling with the intense calculating scrutiny of an apex predator. The inescapable magnetism of his black coffee scent thickened in the room. "What are you hiding in there?" Elias snapped the notebook shut and stood up. His spine was perfectly straight, an unbending line of pure defiance. He tossed the compiled Q3 offshore financial folders onto the glass coffee table, his fingertip tapping against the offshore account numbers printed on the cover. His voice was as freezing as the rain in his scent. "The leverage Merrill Lynch and those 3 hedge funds are using? It's entirely built on the books of your 3 misallocated shell companies in the Caribbean. While you were scouring the globe for the vulnerability, I've already calculated their exact liquidation margins. Why not trigger whatever you're holding and take me down right now?" Victor's hand slid away from the server rack. His pheromones rippled with genuine, perplexed scrutiny. He could clearly trace the bone-deep hostility Elias harbored for him. Elias raised his eyes, his dark irises flaring with a blade-like arrogance. His sea salt and cold rain, laced with that faint sweetness, drove directly into the dense bitterness of the black coffee. "You swallowed my family's empire. You stripped away everything my father built. You will only fall by my hands. I'm not about to let these Wall Street hyenas scavenge the scraps." The stark white light of the glass floor lamp washed over their shoulders as they stood side by side. Elias's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, operating with the flawless precision of a quantum calculator. Every short position he generated locked perfectly onto the adversary's capital choke points. The scorching black coffee pheromones unconsciously softened their sharpest edges. They wrapped around the crisp, cool notes of sea salt and cold rain. Amidst the relentless clatter of the keyboard, the 2 scents slowly bled together into a perfectly balanced, breathtaking resonance. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the pitch-black sky slowly bled into the pale gray of early dawn. The grueling 47-hour standoff had reached its final, critical step. Elias's fingertip hovered just above the enter key, the gland at the back of his neck tingling with a faint, delicate warmth from the soothing pheromones the alpha was unknowingly releasing. Elias's knuckles were strained bone-white, his wrists flushed and swollen from 47 continuous hours of relentless typing. The unyielding spine he had maintained during their showdown hadn't relaxed an inch. Only he knew that the faint, haunting ache in his lower abdomen was still lingering, kept at bay entirely by the black coffee pheromones Victor unconsciously released. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline slowly bled from inky blue into a brilliant rose gold. The dawn breeze, heavy with coastal moisture, pushed against the glass, yet it couldn't scatter the inextricably tangled pheromones inside the room. The scorching, aggressive black coffee had long since sheathed its edge, softening into a profoundly comforting embrace. It fiercely enveloped his sea salt and cold rain, now laced with the delicate sweetness of pregnancy, making his gland tremble with every breathtaking resonance. They lost. Victor's voice came from behind, a low, gravelly rasp, from pulling an all-nighter that sent a shiver straight down the spine. He had been standing behind Elias for the last half hour, with his arms resting on the edge of the desk. His imposing frame almost completely caged Elias in, the scent of black coffee slipping intimately past the collar at the back of his neck. Elias let his fingertips drop lightly. The enter key yielded with a crisp click. Blinding red liquidation data flooded the screen as the three Merrill hedge funds instantly blew up their positions, their floating profits skyrocketing into the 9 figures. Elias let out half a breath. Just as he opened his mouth to call out the settlement commands, his half-raised hand suddenly froze. A searing heat pressed against the hypersensitive skin at the back of his neck. It was Victor's lips. His entire body went rigid. His sea salt and cold rain pheromones wavered uncontrollably. The very next second, teeth gently grazed the fragile skin over his gland. Searing alpha pheromones surged into his system, carrying that unmistakable, bitter heat of black coffee. It flawlessly neutralized the abdominal ache that had haunted him all week, melting the maddening itch in his gland into a bone-deep, intoxicating surrender. Victor's large hand cradled the back of his neck, his thumb tracing the burning gland. There was no further aggression, only pure, intensely possessive comfort. This financial tyrant, a man who kept all of Wall Street firmly under his heel, was now breathing so softly, as if he were holding the most perfect, hard-won prize of his entire life. Elias's grip on the desk edge loosened. A faint flush involuntarily crept to the corners of his eyes. But the hand hidden beneath his sleeve was clenched, dead tight. Driven by sheer biological instinct, he sank a fraction of an inch deeper into that scalding black coffee aroma. The flush at his eyes was nothing but a physiological reaction dragged out by his spiraling pheromones. Hidden deep inside the cuff of his tailored shirt, his knuckles were clenched bone white. The sharp sting of his nails biting into his palm brutally yanked him back from that intoxicating, bone-melting surrender. No matter how deeply moving Victor's comfort felt, no matter how flawlessly the intellectual resonance of black coffee and sea salt cold rain aligned, it could never buy back the family empire Victor had ruthlessly seized and rebranded. His unyielding pride had never been broken. From the day he buried the blade of revenge deep into the foundations of Victor's corporate empire, he had never intended to sheath it. Just moments ago, when they joined forces to obliterate those 3 hedge funds, Victor had voluntarily granted him supreme-level access to the core servers to allow him free reign. It was a battering ram handed over on a silver platter. Victor rested his chin against the crown of Elias's head, his arms still caging his waist. His thumb lazily caressed the newly claimed gland at the nape of his neck. The heavy scent of black coffee drifted up, radiating a profound, inescapable magnetism. Elias kept his eyes downcast, his long lashes perfectly masking the absolute coldness in his gaze. He tilted his head slightly, offering a flawless illusion of submission. Using the Alpha's towering frame to block the screen from view, his fingertips danced rapidly across the silent keyboard. That devastating Trojan code, dormant for 3 long months, slipped soundlessly through the supreme clearance channel straight into the heart of Victor's empire. The USB drive hidden inside the custom notebook blinked a dim green for half a second. Not a single firewall alarm was triggered. Only when the final byte finished loading did Elias let out a soft, imperceptible breath. When he raised his eyes, his expression was locked back into a mask of restrained, icy composure. Victor finally released his hold on Elias's waist. He picked up a gold-embossed invitation from the corner of the desk, flicking his finger against the Isabella family crest stamped on the cover. The scent of black coffee, laced with a low, gravelly chuckle, pressed down over him. "Pack your things. We're leaving now." As Elias's fingertips brushed against the gold foil cover, he inexplicably caught a faint, cloying trace of sweetness, the unmistakable gardenia alpha pheromones of Isabella. Elias froze for a fraction of a second, his fingernail mindlessly tracing the raised gold foil of the crest. He raised his eyes, perfectly masking the cold light surging in his depths. When he spoke, his tone was an impeccable illusion of submission. "We leave in half an hour. I'll go change." Victor spun a platinum cufflink between his fingertips. The aggressive aroma of his black coffee drifted across the desk, brushing the back of Elias's neck. Catching nothing out of the ordinary, Victor merely dropped a final command, "Wear the one I picked out for you," before turning to finalize their itinerary. The fragmented light of crystal chandeliers danced in the champagne flutes, illuminating the restrained desires hidden behind the glamour of the elite corporate charity gala. Elias trailed exactly half a step behind Victor. Clutching the compiled donation reports, he endured the subtle, wandering gazes of the entire room, his spine held perfectly straight. Halfway through the evening, Isabella's assistant approached with a message. Victor had gone to receive the Federal Reserve chairman and requested Elias wait in the second-floor VIP room. Elias didn't flinch. He followed the assistant upstairs. The VIP room door clicked shut behind him, locking into place. Isabella stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning slowly. Her diamond-embroidered haute couture gown only made her expression look all the more sinister. The suffocating scent of gardenia alpha pheromones instantly crushed the air in the room. Her gaze was nailed directly to Elias's waistline. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh, immediately releasing a premeditated, synthetic pheromone explicitly designed to trigger severe stress contractions in an Omega. Elias's fingertips dug desperately into the leather grain of the sofa. The explosive, dull ache from his neck gland crawled down his spine straight into his lower abdomen. The 7-week-old embryo answered with a sharp, terrifying wave of cramps. His sweat-drenched ivory silk shirt clung tightly to his waist, leaving that subtle swell utterly exposed beneath the crystal lighting. His sea salt and cold rain, laced with the delicate sweetness of pregnancy, was brutally scattered by the synthetic inducer. The overwhelming gardenia choked him until his vision went black. Isabella stepped forward on her stilettos, stopping right in front of him. Her manicured nails practically scraped against his stomach, a vicious smile stretching almost to her ears. The doorknob clicked and wrenched open. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. An overwhelming avalanche of black coffee pheromones crashed inside. Carrying the fierce, almost maddening possessiveness of an apex alpha predator, it hit like a sledgehammer forged in ice, instantly pulverizing the gardenia and the synthetic inducer into nothing. Victor stood in the doorway. His custom dark gray suit accentuated the ruthless breadth of his shoulders. His eyes were as dark as century-old ice, a half-empty glass of chilled champagne still gripped lightly in his left hand. Isabella's face drained of color. Her knees buckled, nearly sending her to the floor. "Victor, what are you doing here?" Before the words could even land, Victor closed the distance with long strides. With a flick of his wrist, he poured the entire glass of freezing champagne straight down Isabella's couture shoulder. The golden liquid soaked her rhinestone-embroidered gown, trailing down the thigh-high slit and soaking into the cashmere carpet, leaving a sickeningly sweet stain. "You dare touch what is mine." His voice was a low grind, scraping from beneath a frozen glacier. He tilted his chin toward the assistant who had rushed to the door. "Notify all trading desks. The moment the market opens, aggressively short pan-Atlantic shipping. I want it delisted by tomorrow morning." He paused. His inescapable gaze swept over the violently trembling Isabella, every single word dropping like a physical blow that made the air itself shudder. "Our engagement is void. As of today, the Isabella family is permanently blacklisted from my empire." Security moved in, dragging the sobbing, paralyzed Isabella away. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the explosive gossip of the banquet hall and the frantic footsteps of the staff. The gold foil wallpaper reflected the biting light of the chandeliers. A pearl hairpin Isabella had lost in the struggle lay abandoned on the carpet. The sickening residual scent of gardenia didn't last 2 seconds before it was entirely eradicated by a sudden, massive wave of Victor's black coffee. The aroma was thicker than ever before, carrying an absolute, total domination. It was a scalding bitterness, the unapologetic, feverish devotion of an apex alpha who had fully secured his prize. Elias backed up against the velvet armrest of the sofa. The moment he lifted his eyes, Victor's outstretched arm caged off his only escape. The towering alpha leaned in, carrying the faint burn of brandy. He trapped Elias securely in the corner of the sofa, his calloused palm resting gently against that subtle curve of Elias's stomach. The bitterness of black coffee, laced with borderline obsessive possessiveness, seeped into the fading temporary mark on the back of Elias's neck, burning so fiercely it made his fingertips go numb. Elias gripped the seam of the sofa until his knuckles turned white. His crisp sea salt and cold rain drew taut like a fully strung bow, radiating nothing but the sharp defensive edge of a conquered territory. Every obstacle has been cleared. Victor's voice was a hushed murmur. His thumb slowly stroked the yielding curve of Elias's waist. The surging black coffee wrapped him completely, suffocating in its inescapable magnetism, turning every breath Elias took into a taste of that aggressive bitterness. I've already had the Long Island estate cleared of all non-essential staff. Next week, you move in. You will stay there and deliver this child. Elias's atoms apple-bobbed. Whatever fleeting sliver of hope he had harbored shattered entirely at those words. He could see it with crystal clarity, the underlying ruthless insanity pumping through the veins of the financial tyrant before him. This bond, forged in the name of possession, was never anything more than an apex predator's decree to lock his prize in a gilded cage. His hand, hidden behind his back, slipped silently into his suit pocket. The cold metal of the remote controller pressed against his fingertips. Elias curved his lips, offering a flawless, impenetrable smile without a single trace of fear. All right. A phone buzzed inside Victor's jacket. It was an urgent call from his risk management director, his voice trembling. The news of the broken engagement had just dropped. Isabella's family shipping stock had already triggered 3 circuit breakers, and market panic was bleeding into Victor's flagship bank, sending its shares into a dive. Before leaving, Victor ducked his head to bite Elias's gland, branding him with a fresh, deeper layer of black coffee. His fingertips pressed firmly against Elias's stomach. I will handle this and return. Wait right here for me. The heavy oak door of the VIP room clicked shut. The moment the lock engaged, the faint smile on Elias's face shattered into ice. Clutching the cold metal remote, he navigated the deserted banquet corridors back to the presidential suite. Moving with practiced precision, he pulled a portable workstation from the false bottom of his briefcase and connected to a pre-laid satellite uplink. The lingering notes of black coffee still clung to his collar, radiating the alpha's bone-deep possessiveness. Elias brushed a fingertip over his suit jacket to smooth a faint crease, his hand coming to rest lightly over his slightly warm lower abdomen. There was not a single trace of hesitation in his eyes. His crisp sea salt and cold rain pheromones suddenly surged, carrying the biting chill of a damp blade, completely shattering the residual bitter coffee in the room. He moved his thumb over the red trigger button on the controller and pressed down. Working through the night, he severed every security feed, packed his essentials, and slipped out of the hotel. By the time his boat pulled away from the Manhattan shoreline, the sky was just beginning to bleed into a pale dawn. The doorknob turned its final half rotation in the cool morning ocean breeze. The heavy walnut door was pushed inward, and fiercely dominant black coffee pheromones immediately crashed into the empty presidential suite. It carried the icy, inescapable magnetism the Alpha had just dragged out of the Wall Street storm. In his strong, defined right hand, Victor gripped a velvet ring box, stamped with a subtle monogram. His jawline was still set with the ruthless edge of having just dismantled the Isabella family crisis. His thumb absent-mindedly brushed the embossed logo. It held a 10-carat blue diamond he had picked up from Fifth Avenue after working through the night, a custom piece secured exclusively for Elias. His footsteps stopped dead, his brow locked into a razor-sharp knot. The person he expected was nowhere to be found. The only thing left in the suite was Elias's unapologetic, defiant scent, drilling into his senses like shards of freezing ice. Victor's inescapable gaze swept the suite, the meticulously made bed, the empty nightstand where the portable workstation used to sit, the bare hangers in the walk-in closet, the faint tracks of luggage wheels pressed into the wool carpet. In the corner, the security terminal was pitch black. The infrared indicator was completely dead, the signal severed from the inside, not destroyed by external force. His knuckles around the ring box turned bone white. The black coffee pheromones abruptly flared into a violent tempest, making the floor-to-ceiling windows vibrate with a low hum. Out in the hallway, the standby bodyguards stiffened instantly, not daring to breathe. Victor pulled his encrypted phone from his jacket and hit the direct line to his assistant. The moment the call connected, his assistants panicked. Pitch-breaking screams shattered the morning silence. "Boss, the core trading system is completely paralyzed. Every single offshore liquidity position, $12.7 billion in total, is entirely frozen. We can't find a single trace of the attacker." Victor's head snapped up. His gaze pierced through the mist-shrouded windows, landing far out on the gray-blue mouth of the harbor. A pristine white private yacht, having cleared departure protocols an hour ago, was just rounding the breakwater. Inch by inch, the vessel vanished into the rolling fog of the Atlantic. 3 years of mist rolled across the Atlantic waves, drifting from the New York harbor all the way to the undisturbed white sands of southern St. Bart's. Elias sat beneath a teak parasol. The sleeves of his linen shirt rolled to the elbows. His portable workstation rested on his knees, his fingertips cooled by the condensation from an iced coconut. Not far away, right at the tide line, a 2-year-old toddler crouched in the sand, clutching half a mango. Fine grains of sand clung to his golden brown curls as he engaged in a fierce standoff with a fist-sized hermit crab, his soft, babbling hums drifting over on the ocean breeze. For 3 years, Elias had stayed hidden here, living a quiet, secure life consulting on offshore assets for old European wealth. The deafening roar of helicopter rotors suddenly ripped through the sky overhead. A scorching downdraft kicked up a storm of white sand, sending beachgoers scrambling back with surprised shouts. Elias's fingers froze on the keyboard. The fluctuating candlestick chart on his screen jerked into a sharp, erratic angle. He looked up. Walking straight through the scattering crowd was Victor. The hem of his casual beige linen suit brushed against the swirling sand. He hadn't brought a single bodyguard. His posture was as tall and commanding as ever, though the ruthless edge of his jawline had softened over the past 3 years. Even the signature arrogance pinned to the corners of his eyes seemed to have lost some of its sharp contour. The bitter aroma of black coffee drifted over on the sea breeze. It wasn't the destructive, overbearing tempest meant to crush everything in its path. It was warm, a rich, mellow bitterness that slowly washed over the back of Elias's neck, making the gland he had kept sealed for 3 years pulse frantically. Without a change in expression, Elias tightened his grip around the cold metal hidden in his pocket. He took a half-step forward, firmly shielding the small figure crouching by the tide, his spine drawn as tight as a fully strung bow. Victor stopped exactly 2 steps away. The salty sea breeze caught the hem of his jacket. He lowered his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the tense, sharp line of Elias's jaw, then flickering to the small tuft of golden brown curls peeking out from behind him. Slowly, Victor reached his right hand into the inner pocket of his suit. At the same time, keeping his eyes locked on Elias, who stood rooted to the spot, he slowly bent his right knee. What Victor pulled from his custom suit wasn't a weapon, nor was it a diamond ring. It was a thick stack of legal documents embossed with dark gold foil, the cover unmistakably bearing the crest of V Capital Group. The rich, mellow black coffee pheromones no longer carried that aggressive, inescapable magnetism that had suffocated the penthouse 3 years ago. Instead, it gently enveloped Elias's frantically pulsing, long-sealed gland. It carried the sun-drenched warmth of his journey, slowly melting away that deep, instinctual shudder. Elias backed hard against the wooden door of the beach house, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the handle for dear life. A soft rustling came from behind as the little one clung to the doorframe. The 2-year-old boy poked his head out, his pale gray eyes a perfect striking mirror of Elias's. His soft hair fluttered wildly in the sea breeze. Catching the scent of the alpha pheromones carved directly into his lineage, he showed absolutely no fear. Waddling forward on his chubby little legs, he broke right through Elias's protective hold. The fingers Victor rested on the documents trembled imperceptibly. Over his lifetime, he had signed off to freeze tens of billions in assets and ruthlessly acquired half the syndicates on Wall Street, yet he had never been this terrified. He spread the documents open. In the most prominent spot on the very first page, his full name was already signed in bold ink. It clearly stated, an unconditional transfer of a 67% controlling stake in the restructured V Capital Group, with absolutely no strings attached. You won, Elias. His voice was incredibly hoarse. Gone was the icy arrogance of the financial tyrant. All that remained was 3 years of deep-seated, heavy apprehension. I am giving you my entire empire. All I want is an equal place, to be his father, and to be your partner. The little boy tugged at Victor's cuff, rubbing his cheek against the fabric. In a sweet, milky voice, he babbled 2 fuzzy syllables. It was a word Elias had only occasionally taught him while looking at old photographs, never expecting that the very first time he said it out loud, it would be right to the man himself, Papa. Victor's breath hitched violently. He looked up at Elias standing in the doorway, his dark eyes swirling with the agonizing fear of being pushed away. There was not a single trace of his former desire for total domination. Elias looked down at that bold, decisive signature. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the hoarseness of a man who was truly unbinding his heart for the first time in 3 years. Get up. The sand is hot on the knees.
And that is where our story concludes. Victor is a character I genuinely both love and hate. When he first steps onto the scene, he is a clinical, ruthless financial tyrant, radiating the sheer arrogance and desire for total domination typical of an apex alpha. Yet, I absolutely love the instinctual duality hidden within his nature. The moment he caught the scent of Elias's distressed pheromones, seeing that apex predator instantly morph into a fierce protector was full of breathtaking tension. Watching his actions at the gala, pouring that freezing champagne, ruthlessly voiding the engagement, and blacklisting Isabella without a second thought for Elias's sake was intensely domineering, but undeniably satisfying to watch. On the other hand, Elias, despite being an Omega, possesses a spine-chilling, unbending pride and absolute clarity of mind. Faced with his family's ruin, crushing debt, and the relentless pressure from his sworn enemy, bowing down was never an option for him. Even while carrying a child and enduring excruciating physical pain alongside suffocating pheromonal suppression, he maintained his icy facade. He calmly orchestrated his revenge, planting a fatal Trojan directly into the heart of Victor's empire. After 2 years apart, Victor finally comes to understand his own heart and learns how to truly love someone. This time, he lets go of his ego and sheds his unyielding armor. By personally handing over the controlling stakes of his newly restructured company, he is simply asking for one thing, an equal chance to pursue Elias all over again. What do you think? Should Elias forgive him? Share your thoughts and join the discussion in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next story.